Burkina Faso. On this day of commemoration of the abolition of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, the member countries of the Confederation bow with respect before the memory of all of the innocent people who suffered unjustly from these abhorrent acts. It is deeply regrettable that societies calling themselves civilized deemed it normal at a certain point in their history to systematically reduce other human beings to the status of things, to torture them, to sell them, to deprive them of all dignity, and to deny them their humanity. Today's ceremony must not be limited to simply honoring the memory of the more than 10 million Africans who were deported and enslaved in inhumane and degrading conditions. It must also serve as an opportunity for us to identify the responsibility for the harm done to Africa and to humanity as a whole, and to affirm a strong collective commitment to act for justice so that such atrocities never happen again. Madam President, on this subject, some states prefer silence and prefer to suffocate the truth about these macabre events. At the time when a series of measures are brought into being to recall and commemorate other human tragedies, sometimes of far lesser magnitude, the Confederation of Sahel States believes, on the contrary, that the truth must be brought to light and the reparations must be pursued. And the current context calls for this as certain nations continue to treat Africa as a private domain to the point where their parliamentarians, like the slavers of yesterday who decided on the fate of millions of Africans, now presume to legislate on the internal affairs of the sister country, the Republic of Niger. The Confederation condemns the pseudo-humanistic and neo-colonialist posture, which reflects a logic of mercantilist and imperialist exploitation of the continent. Indeed, there is a common thread between the slavery and transatlantic trade of the past and the terrorism plaguing the Sahel today, namely the enrichment of colonial and imperial powers on one side and the impoverishment and the fragmentation of Africa on the other. In the past, these powers built their economies by draining Africa of its human labor. Today's African natural resources are being plundered using strategies of terror and endless conflict, and this is done through terrorist mercenaries and other criminal armed groups that are financed and instrumentalized. Madam President, faced with the reflexes of these slave trading and imperialist states that refuse to accept the emancipation of the peoples of the Sahel and of Africa, the Confederation of Sahel States remains committed to supporting any initiative aimed at restoring the dignity of African peoples, including through reparations. We therefore welcome and fully support the initiative of the African Union to adopt a resolution which categorizes slavery and the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. We also take this opportunity to thank Ghana for so eloquently voicing the continent's position on this question, and we express our deep gratitude to His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President of Ghana. I thank you.
Jake was at $110,000 as a data analyst, wondering if he can make more by becoming a data engineer.
Wow, what a bombshell dropped by the representative of Burkina Faso at the United Nations during the motion of recognizing the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. Can you believe that US, that is preaching human rights, rejected to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity? Can you believe that? Let me take you to what US said about transatlantic slave trade.
It's important to acknowledge with deep regret that the prohibitions on slavery, the slave trade, and what are now considered crimes against humanity had not yet been established in international law at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. None of the recognized sources of international law, as set out in Article 38 of the Statute of the International Court of Justice, identify a prohibition on slavery and the slave trade until the 20th century.